So you're successful, you have the practice, you have the money, you have the family, you have it all. So why is it that you get home on Friday and all you want to do is crash out on the couch, feeling miserable and figuring out how you're going to get yourself ready to go back to the office on Monday?
Hi, I'm Dr. Bill Nudera.
I'm Dr. Brett Gilbert.
And welcome to For the Love of Endo, where we're elevating endodontics one conversation at a time. Brett, this topic today is directly from your wheelhouse. And for those of you listening or watching that don't know, Brett Gilbert has a second podcast called On the Cusp, where he looks at what our topic is going to be for today. So, Brett, why don't you introduce our topic? Go ahead.
Yeah, so our topic is really about burnout, right? It's about balance, and it's about finding meaning again in a life that feels kind of numb and feels kind of stressful all the time. And this is the plight of the clinician. Now, Bill, a lot of what we do on the Cusp is the premise of it is yes, you planted your flag on the mountaintop, you got your degree, but then you realize that it does sometimes feel empty. So how do we find fulfillment in this clinical life? In many cases, a lot of doctors have left dentistry because they just felt that they couldn't continue. Others have sort of stuck it out and are miserable. And what I hope to be is someone that has kind of felt both ways at times, but has been a bridge where I've been able to develop strategies, skills, learning, coaching, emotional intelligence, wellness, where I can be both, right? Where you can be that clinician that you train so hard to be and you love being, but diversify your life with things that light you up. Because this is a very difficult, challenging career. Any dentist is working in a very dense, heavy environment of anxiety, stress, patients coming in pain, all the procedural issues, all the financial issues, staffing. So it's no wonder that as clinicians, we wind up feeling burnt out. And what that really means is just sort of your nervous system has been pushed at capacity for so long that you just can't recover. And that recovery is not just physical. It's not just mental. It's spiritual. It's whole person. And so I think this topic is really important because the number one thing, Bill, I want doctors to get out of this is you're not alone. We are all going through it and are able to cope or not cope based upon our upbringing, based upon our past experience, based upon the influences in our life. So let's talk a little bit about what doctors can do to sort of first recognize this is normal. This is something you can overcome, but it's not going to be a permanent solution. I find myself vacillating, and Bill was saying I have the podcast called On the Cusp. We talk a lot about mental and emotional resilience and burnout, only because I'm going through this in real time. I'm going through periods of burnout. I would say probably 3 to 4 major episodes of burnout and then lots of micro burnouts. And I even shared with you a couple weeks ago when I was feeling that way. So I appreciate that we can bring this topic and center it back more toward the endodontic space, but also recognize that this applies not just to general dentists, it applies to pediatricians, it applies to ophthalmologists, and most especially veterinarians. They have a very high rate of burnout and actually a higher rate of suicide than dentists.
That's unbelievable. We carry a lot of weight on our shoulders. The patients expect a lot from us. They expect miracles and they expect everything's going to last forever. The expectations on a dentist nowadays is so much greater than it used to be, not only because of the demand, but because of the information generation, right? Everybody can do their own research. Everybody thinks they go to Dr. Google and they have the answers. And then when you're saying something that may be different from what the patient expects, you feel that pressure. You feel the pressure of running a business. You feel the pressure of getting the CE. You feel the pressure of loans. You know, you've got all of this stuff that just keeps weighing on you, and it's going to add up. And what does it affect? Not just you, it affects your family.
Yes.
It affects your spouse if you're married. It affects your life. All love what we do, or at least I think most of us probably love what we do. We all got into this profession, dentistry and endodontics in general, because we love helping. And, you know, people that come to me, young high school people, college people, say, I want to be a physician, I want to be a dentist. Anybody who practices in healthcare, it's a calling. You have to want to help people. Those who say, I'm going to do it for the money, you're making the wrong choice. I mean, granted, what we do is lucrative. Let's not lie, okay? But if that's the reason why you're choosing to do this, that's the wrong reason. You know, I think that having this be a calling then puts even greater pressure on us. And if we don't address those mental strains, then what happens? Brett, you know a lot more of this because you've done some deep dives into it yourself. Tell me what burnout looks. Let's define what burnout is first.
Yeah. So burnout, it was actually first described in the 70s as a term related to caregivers. So health professional caregivers. And the fact that in essence, it's very easy, as you were saying, it's a calling to give more than you actually have because it's your natural inclination. And so you can actually burn out. And what that means, usually it looks like feeling more frustration with what you do, having some sort of disconnection and a lack of empathy for your patients after a period of time, because it's almost like you just burn yourself out where you can't even feel anymore. And then also a drop in performance. Now, in my personal experience, it starts to be where negative thoughts creep in, right? Where that voice in your head, which is not who you are, it's just your egoic mind trying to keep you safe, but it starts speaking negatively to you. So your thoughts are negative, your mood is negative, your outlook toward the future feels really bleak. Your body starts to hurt. The sleep, once I can't sleep, I know I'm in trouble. The spiraling, right? And a lot of this is something that can be very scary. So the first time it happened, I came home and I told my wife, I'm really scared because I think I don't want to be a dentist anymore. And that was what started my personal journey. And you can hear all of that on the Cusp. It's well documented, my ups and downs through this career. But one of the biggest things, Bill, you said, which was the mental stress. So one of the biggest issues we have is the perfectionism. So I recently did a video. It was like, I'm at a dental school 25 years, and it was the top 3 things that I learned. And the first one was the biggest struggle, the biggest obstacle, the biggest difficulty you'll have in this clinical career is in between your ears. It's the way that your mindset dictates. Bill and I were just having lunch, and I said, how are things going at the office? Because I was having some frustrations. Again, I was just kind of coming out of a burnout episode, and again, there's macro burnout where it's like catastrophic, and there's micro burnout where it's maybe one day or a week. So I'm coming through this burnout episode of a couple of weeks, and the reality is that I recognized that it was my mindset. And we just had lunch, and he said, how are things going? I said, it's been better because I've had a much better mindset.
That's so important. Is having that right frame of mind going into everything is just so critical. We were also talking at lunch too on how when we see patients, we're always on. And we give our patients our energy. We give them everything because again, as endodontists, and as dentists, we live our lives a quarter millimeter at a time, right? We are trained to be perfectionists in an imperfect world. And when things don't work out, we blame ourselves. We go through these emotions of, should I have done something different? We second guess things. And I've been there too. I can't really confess that I've had any major burnout issues, but the things you're saying about sleep and those micro burnouts, there's some days, first of all, I love what I do, but there's some days I get up and I don't really feel like going in today. I don't feel like going in today. But I try to then snap out of it. I use some of the tools that I was taught very early in my life to just, okay, you can't fail in the now. We're always present in the now, and just kind of just take the situation for what it is. And once you get in there, once we have our huddle, once I get my team together, say, hey, we're all going to be our A game today. What's our mission? Our mission to provide the best endodontic experience available anywhere. We're all going to do that for every single patient that walks in, regardless of how grumpy they are, regardless of how angry they are. And I'll tell you, the people that I really have to watch for burnout is my front office. My front office, they take the brunt of every angry patient, because every angry patient, by the time they're upset, they come to see me. Oh, hi, doctor, how are you? But my front desk, my clinical team has taken some of that stress. So I'm always talking to my team about, listen, this is the job, but we have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. So we talk about some tools that we could help to mitigate some of these things here. So what do you do when you feel that way, Brett? So let's talk about some techniques and what we can do to help the listeners or the people watching this understand, first of all, what it is and how do we fix it?
Yeah, well, I don't know that. So first and foremost, I would say that burnout and the circumstances that create it are unique and individual to each of us. Okay.
Fair.
Based on our backgrounds, our traumas, what we're going through, our personalities, the support systems we have. So the first thing to acknowledge is that your burnout is uniquely yours. And there's not really necessarily a way out of it. It's more of Bill just said he had developed or had learned some tools, right? Some practices. And so to me, it's a daily effort. So it's about, number one, in this profession where we give so much to everyone, and we were talking about this earlier, we give, 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 give. So for instance, I might wake up in the morning, leave early for the office, and give so much, give it all. Leave it on the field, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Then I come to the house, of which I have not seen my family yet this day. And I am spent. I'm exhausted. I'm empty. I want to crash on the couch. Now, how is that fair to the most important people in our lives?
It's not. And that's the short answer. It's not.
And so I've done, and I say to myself, I have served everyone today. I've done so much for everyone, but I haven't done anything for them. So if you need motivation as to why this is a topic worth exploring, even if you're not fully aware of your own situation, I guarantee your partner is.
You bet.
And the reality is that I feel that the most important way and the way that I work through it is developing a tool belt. So that means, listening to podcasts. It means talking to people. It means getting up a little bit earlier. I know Bill believes in this as well. The early morning hours for a professional like us, where we have so much responsibility, that's one time, sure, you get a little less sleep, but the reward of carving out time. So for instance, for me, my routine involves breath work when I first wake up. It involves some type of movement and stretching. It involves meditation. It involves journaling, and it involves finishing my shower ice cold, right? That's all before I've even gotten ready for work, right? So the reality is that those things bolster me, because what they do is they remind me that I'm filling my own cup first. Because I think we've learned, especially in the American culture, that if you do things for yourself, it's selfish. But that's wrong, I've learned, right? Because what that led me to do is I kept feeling like if I did anything for myself, I was being selfish. And so I kept pouring my cup empty. Mm-hmm. And finally, you pour it so empty that there's literally nothing left, not only for me, but for me to give anyone. So when we nurture ourselves, when we take care of ourselves, when we have these practices of, stillness. I interviewed yesterday on the podcast the founder of the Love Tuner, which is this little tuner that puts out a 528 hertz frequency, which is called the love frequency. And to hear this gentleman talk about the science behind even just what sound can do, and that after you experience the sound, how you can be in just a space of stillness, even for 30 seconds. So the point is, I think people think that they need to do these grand things to get benefit. But the reality is small incremental practices can change your life. And most importantly, and this is the take-home message, this isn't just for you. This is for everyone in your orbit, because a regulated nervous system in a clinician regulates other clinicians, regulates your assistants, regulates your family. So the investment in nervous system regulation is the biggest thing you can do to stop burnout.
Energy is contagious.
Yeah.
Energy is contagious. My morning routine, a little different. Okay. I'll get up. I'm a very early riser. Most of the time during the week, I'm up by 4 a.m. I'm up by 4 a.m. because that's when I get my time to myself. Mm-hmm. My wife and I, we get up at the same time, but we are kind of in our own little spaces here. We may sit next to each other in the kitchen having our cup of coffees, but we're all in our own little spaces here. Then I take a moment and I stretch. I take about 30 minutes every morning and I stretch. And for you younger dentists out there, if you're not in a habit of stretching on a routine daily basis, start now. Mm-hmm. I haven't stretched my whole life. Later in my life, I've gotten more in the habit of doing it, because when you're young, you feel great, but we're going to get old. Everybody gets old sometimes. Your joints start to hurt. Your neck starts to feel it. Everything starts to feel it. So I stretch. I make sure I get loosened up. And then I go to the gym. I do weight training. I do cardio. You know why? It releases endorphins in my mind. It just makes me feel so good. And that's how I get the start to my day. So I come home, I'm energized, I stretch, I work out, then I go to work. I see patients early. I see my first patient at 7. We're early in the clinic. And then, I get my team on board. We have our huddles. We kind of get that positive energy. And if I see one of my team members that doesn't look like that positive energy, after the huddle, I'll pull them aside and I'll say, listen, I go, is everything okay? And I'll make sure that, and generally they're going to say yes, because sometimes I'll have a team member share with me some information here so they understand where their mind is, where they're at. But for the most part, I said, okay, listen, I understand that there's a personal thing happening at home, but This patient doesn't know that. I go, you are here to make a difference for somebody else. I go, we have to kind of set some of these issues aside and make sure we're providing this patient with their A game. And then I'll talk to them. I'll follow up with them throughout the day, make sure they're doing okay. I've never really sent anybody home. I don't think I've ever had to do that.
Right.
But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're all giving everything we can to our patient. And then I come home and I make sure I give that same amount of energy to my family. I can't say that I always used to do that. There were some times in my earlier in my career, I would just get home and I would just crash. And maybe that's a form of burnout I didn't recognize. It probably was in self-reflection as I look back at this. And then, I'd just be sitting there, it'd be like a lump on the couch, just waiting for the next day. And my wife be all happy to see me, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just so tired. I just exhausted myself. We used to call them energy vampires, the patients that would take up all of your time, all of your energy. And I don't let that happen to me anymore. If a patient wants to take my energy, I'll sit there in the room and listen to them, but I'm not going to engage, and I'm not going to allow them to do that to me anymore. Because now I go home, I give my family all the same energy that I did with every single one of my patients all day, and it makes a huge difference. So that's the way
that's a gift, man. And the most important thing to realize is, like, we were trained for our hands. We were not trained for our minds. And so having this understanding is number one, you're not alone. Number two, it's totally natural to feel this way. But you do have to work at combating it and developing practices that work for you, but ultimately with the goal that the whole family shouldn't suffer because you had a bad day at the office. And to some degree, that's just human nature. But when it's habitual, we find that when spouses of our colleagues get together, like my wife to someone else's, what have you, they're often talking about the same story. So what it tells us is that we need more education on this. We need this as a practice because we are leaders. And ultimately, I think, Bill, with our experience going back 20 some years, speaking to the younger dentists, the ones that are maybe still in dental school, in residency, maybe they're young, is to let them know that you can get in front of this and you can have a much better life. I'm not talking about your career. I'm talking about your life, because life as a clinician is hard. But you can make it a lot harder when you're not addressing your emotions and not taking care of your body, like you mentioned. So,
in an earlier episode that you may have listened to, we talked about what's dental school not teaching you, and one of the things it's not really teaching anybody is how to manage the emotional strain that dentistry has. This is hard work.
Yes.
I've heard some people compare us to people like athletes, the strain that we're putting our bodies through, the mental strain that we're putting our minds through. So in order to grow as a person, in order to be happy as a person, you've got to think of mind, body, and spirit. And every single one of those has to be in alignment. And when they are, it's a beautiful thing. But then when they get off alignment, you just have to remind yourself or take those mental tools. I know you're big into meditation. You're big into breath work.
Yes.
My meditation is, I'm a musician. I'll sit behind my drum set and I will play. And I will just lose track of time. I just get in the zone, the flow.
Beautiful.
And it was funny because I was talking to my wife about this, and I said, well, I'm going to start meditating. She goes, what do you mean? You already do. You already meditate through the beats and the rhythms and everything that I just release it all. So I find that most dentists have some sort of creative hobby associated. It may be cooking, it may be woodworking, it may be music, it may be writing, it may be poetry, a lot of different things. So that also could be an outlet for you to actually regain some of that energy back. So those are some of the techniques that I do. I just try to take myself out of the situation a little bit. And I also have a commute. I have a very long commute. I've got 2 locations. Each of them are about maybe 18 to 20 miles away. So on the way home, sometimes in rush hour traffic, it may take me 45 minutes. On the longer side, sometimes over an hour to get home. And I take that time in the car and I get to decompress.
Yeah, it's nice.
So that's another tool that I use to make sure that I'm giving my family as much energy as I'm giving my practice every day.
Yeah. And the biggest, most foundational skill, if you want to start somewhere, is just the breathing. Because even at the chair or in your private office, you have the ability to take in breath. It's free. It's always available. And what you're doing, and I want to explain this because I think it's important. It's not just, take a deep breath. Obviously it makes you feel better, but when you start to take control of your breath, the rate of flow, how it enters and exits, what you're telling your nervous system is that you're safe. Because in fight or flight, of course, everything ramps up, everything is tight, everything is pounding. And so in this moment, you're probably not going to take a deep breath. But when you can control your breathing, you sort of take back control of your mind, of your body. It allows for the relaxation response. So, and just hold it for a couple seconds, and the key is you want the out breath to be a little longer than the in breath. And that activates the relaxation response. So I do this all day long. And I always say, have a few cues, like when you wash, how many times you wash your hands in a day?
Too many to count.
So every time I go to wash my hands, it's a mental cue. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. You know, under the mask, at the chair, it's incredible, the effect. So I feel better just from that one breath, you know? So, but I would say there's a lot to explore here, but keep in mind that if I remember Kevin King, who was my partner, you know.
I know Kevin.
I was telling him when I was really young, you know, I want to get busier. I want to get busier. I work in more days, more hours. And he's like, you know, just be careful because you might burn out. And I thought to myself, what are you talking about?
Not me.
Well, it happened. It took about 8 more years, but it happened. And then it becomes a situation where we have this beautiful skill. We have everything set up perfectly. And a lot of us just want to flee. So what does it tell you? It tells you that we are not processing and digesting our stress in the proper way. And it's mainly because we never were taught how. So we talked about what didn't dental school teach you? It didn't teach you mastery of self. It didn't teach you business. Didn't teach you a whole lot of endo.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
And that's why we always say the learning begins when we step out of school. And we're grateful to be in an age where as mentors, we feel comfortable enough to share the real deal of what we're living through, what we've been through, what we anticipate going through in pure honesty and openness and vulnerability, quite honestly. I think vulnerability, you will find, will be a tenet of this show because that's how we learn, is by sharing the deepest, darkest.
We have no secrets. We have absolutely no secrets on this show. So let me ask you another question to the burnout and being able to counteract it here. Does diet play a role in any of the things that you've looked at? And if so, from your knowledge, how so?
Yeah. So if you look at everything as energy, right? So, you know, a healthy meal, like we just had a healthy meal-ish. Yeah, it was ish. Actually, I was thinking about the potato chips, but you know, what you eat has a vibration, has an energy. So something that's really, you know, low end fast food, very low energy. So it's going to pull you down, right? Same thing with what you watch, what you listen to, who you hang around with. You're going to absorb that energy. So, you know, eating healthy, eating things that you know are good for your body, that's high vibration, right? The media that you consume, you know, there's a base brain in our bodies that loves to stop and look at a car wreck. Like, why? Right? To hear about all the darkest, dirtiest things that other humans are doing. There's a base brain that like wants that, but that's very low energy, as is the emotion of shame. And we can't sit here and talk about burnout and being a dentist and not address that we a lot of times take on shame because we think we are, you said it, we are responsible. It's our tooth that we were supposed to heal and we didn't do it. Well, let's step back from that, from the perfectionism, from the control. We can help the patient set the stage for their body to heal. We are not responsible for that healing. We are not in control of that healing. And in reality, we fool ourselves in getting emotionally invested in that. All you can do is show up the healthiest, best version of yourself every time and do your very best in excellence. And nature's going to take its course. But the reality is that the energy of what you're doing. So if you're listening to really upbeat music, right? If you tune into our podcast or On the Cusp, where we're talking about raising your vibrations. You asked about food, but I think it's anything that we intake is going to be digested and we're going to match the energy of it. So stay high because it'll keep you going.
So another way to counteract burnout is take some time off. Take some time off. So that kind of comes with a double-edged sword, you know?
It sure does.
You know, I built my own practice. I've grown my own business. You've grown your own business. And sometimes, and dentists are mostly production-based earners. So the way I used to look at vacation time is, well, not only do I have to pay for a vacation, but I'm losing revenue from the time I'm not in the clinic. And gosh, that was such a backwards way of looking at this. Because, yeah, that may be the case, But the fact that you can actually step away from the practice for some short periods of time, recharge your mind, recharge your body, just relax and get some downtime away from the practice will allow you to practice better longer. So I think that's one thing here that took me a while to understand. And it's easy for me to sit here after 26 years of practicing dentistry to say that I take vacations more now than I ever have, but I wish I would have started it sooner. So again, I know that not everybody feels like they're in a position. You don't have to take these extravagant, super expensive vacation. Maybe just take a long weekend. Maybe take a Friday off or take a Monday off and just kind of a little home retreat, a staycation. Or just go somewhere driving distance, a couple of hours away. Just get out of your normal environment and just let things release, because it's extremely effective.
Yeah. It's a lot. There aren't many human beings that are asked to do what we do on a every hour basis. Putting out so intricate, so complex, managing the patient. I mean. And then, as Bill's saying, also having the financial implications that all this is tied to, the financial stability of your family and, not getting paid when you're away from the chair and all of these things. But you added the best. If you look at the long-term impacts of a regulated nervous system, of a healthy body and mind, you're going to be much more successful, because the reality is that we are putting a lot of wear and tear on our bodies. We are putting a lot of stress and strain in our relationships. And so there's probably a lot easier ways to make money. You kind of alluded to that before. There's a lot easier ways to have a better family life. But look, we didn't get here because we're ordinary. We got here because we are all extraordinary. I don't care if you were number one in your class or last in your class. You are a clinician, you're a doctor. You have the ability to do amazing things. Start applying that to yourself. I always say, if you thought about yourself as your most important patient and you took care of yourself like that patient, and you're always looking out for yourself, this is not selfish. This is actually the most selfless act you can do. Because when I fill my own cup, I start to overflow and have so much to give others. And that's the mistake I made for 43 years of my life. And at 43 years, when I hit my first burnout and I really was scared, these were the lessons I started to learn. And as I started to practice daily practices, little habits that I can start to add in reading and listening and talking, so that I could hear something, it goes into my tool belt. And one random day, one thing happens, and I just remember that one little thing. And it's just enough to lift me out of it. Because the reality is that we are in an environment where even our own thoughts can trigger us into trauma, into pain, into shame. Just our own thought, or someone says something to you, or you have a memory. And so it's the ability to acknowledge your own reactions, your own feelings, so that you acknowledge and recognize them, and then you can counteract them. You can adjust to them. But what mostly happens is we are so unintelligent about our own emotions that they run us over and wild. If we simply can focus on our own emotional intelligence definition, a deep, keen understanding of our own emotions, our own reactions, our own triggers. And when you start to become emotionally intelligent inside your own skin, you then start to become much more emotionally intelligent about the people that are in your circle, the people you're looking at. And instead of always finding yourself in a combative, argumentative frame of view, you're going to start feeling love. Because when you give love in, love goes out and it comes back.
So well said. Getting into something like emotional intelligence training, reading books, I mean, there's got to be a starting point for somewhere. If you're experiencing this burnout, I just can't do this anymore, then we need to figure out where our starting point is to try to make an adjustment or a course trajectory of some kind. Not everybody's going to want to jump away and do these long weekend courses, right? So how does somebody start exploring these options? There's got to be some literature, some books, or some resources out there that we can direct people to in order to start, looking for those avenues to change their emotional intelligence and counteract that burnout or get those tools. So are there any specific books that you've read or courses that you've taken?
Yes.
I know you have a course where you talk about
Yeah,
it. You just did that at the AE 26.
Yeah, well, first and foremost is, for me, it started with podcasts. So the podcast that I was drawn to was called The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes. And it was my first sort of like understanding that there is a whole field of study on personal growth and development. But I asked myself this exact question, Bill, in terms of like, how can I support clinicians? Because our situation is nuanced, right? And that was actually why I started the podcast On the Cusp. It is about the clinician life. It's not a clinical podcast. You're not going to have Bill and I talking about gutta percha on there. What it is about the human behind the clinical coat, right? And the human that needs to manage all of this. And that's why I built it. So I have guests on there that talk about their own journey. And what I find interesting about in books too, Brene Brown, The Gift of Imperfection, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Those were two of the first books that I read. So there's lots of those, but check out a podcast, because what I find is when you listen to someone else's story, there will be one little thing that resonates. That's a tool in your tool belt. And that's where I started. I've done emotional intelligence training. I've worked with coaches. I've done retreats. You know, doing some mission work can be great because you get into this frame of service. Service without a financial transaction is one of the most beautiful feelings in the world. Somehow that financial transaction changes things just a little bit. And so getting yourself outside of your typical environment and finding out who you really are, because I think we get caught up in the doldrums of the repetition and the stressful environment, and we kind of lose sight as to who we really are. So looking inside, going into stillness, really feeling your feels. So if that means you start to feel a lot of pain and you're sad or you're shameful or you have trauma, what the emotional intelligence training did for me, Bill, was allowed me to heal, because I finally looked inside. And even when it hurt, I stayed with it for a minute. And once you sit with that and sit with your feelings and accept them and don't judge them, they evaporate. They just go. And I explain trauma like this. It's almost like having a shard of glass in your chest. And so everything that comes at you has to go around that trauma, right? And you might turn or have a thought and the trauma, the glass cuts you all over again, right? Well, if we can just sit with the trauma, sit with the pain, let it hurt for a minute, and then it sort of lifts and it sort of evaporates. And what happens? It creates space. And that space inside can be filled with whatever lights you up. So that's what I say about that. Start small, start with one daily habit, a deep breath. Get into a podcast you enjoy, read a book, but mostly spend a little bit of time with just yourself. Be quiet, don't judge, and let the healing happen naturally. Because we look at our patients, Bill. We are healing machines. That's not just physical. It's emotional and mental too.
You bet. You know, there have been several reports and studies out there in the literature that the mindset of a patient, when you do a treatment on them, if their mindset is, oh, this isn't going to work, or they have a negative frame of mind going into a procedure, it's less likely to be successful for them versus somebody that goes into a procedure with a more positive mindset. So there is a mind-body connection to what we're doing, not just within the patients we treat, but within ourselves providing the treatment itself. So there are also different levels of areas you can work into. You can do the self-guided treatments like the books, like the podcasts. You can get a mentor. All right, you can talk to some friend. I mean, you're not the only one going through something like this, but sometimes it can be difficult to be talking about this because you just feel so alone, I would imagine, in this particular situation.
Yeah, and I'm about to launch a course with Dr. Christian Pavel. It's called Mind Reset, Revive the Dream, right? This dream of being a healthcare provider. And so it's going to be a 6-week cohort, and it's going to be this coaching, right? It's going to be introducing you to yourself through your coaches and through the group. And so I'm very passionate about this.
When is this coming out? When are you looking to?
Yeah, we're going to be launching this in January, but actually the pre-registration is already open. We're going to offer some pre-coaching through the end of 2026 and start with our cohort. It's only 16 doctors that we're opening this up to, actually specifically for practice owners, for a lot of what we talked about, the burdens of business and ownership. And so I'm really excited about this project. And again, only because, like, if you see someone like me who's always talking about burnout, and all, it's because I'm going through it, I'm managing it, and I know you must be too. And so I want to put myself out there, share my vulnerability so that you can improve yourself. Because again, we are elevating endodontics one conversation at a time. And the healthier you are as a person, a human being, the healthier you are walking into the operatory. And in my opinion, healthy clinician, better treatment.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Fantastic.
Beautiful.
Just fantastic.
Beautiful.
Well, I hope that you've gotten something meaningful out of this conversation today. We're going to put some resources in the show notes, some of the books that Brett mentioned, certainly.
And some more. I'll put some more in there.
And a course that he's going to be developing here too. Knowing Brett for as long as I've known him, I know it's going to be a great course. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And with that, to your point, we are elevating endodontics one conversation at a time. I thank all of those who are listening either on the podcast platform or the YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you in the next episode.